Oftentimes, a psalm is chosen in response to the reading before it. And so on this All Saints' Day, and in response to our story from 2 Kings, Psalm 30. I will exalt you, O Lord, because you have lifted me up and have not let my enemies triumph over me. O Lord my God, I cried out to you, and you restored me to health. You brought me up, O Lord, from the dead. You restored my life, though I was going down to the grave. Sing praise to the Lord, all you faithful. Give thanks in holy remembrance. God's wrath is short. God's favor lasts a lifetime. Weeping spends the night, but joy comes in the morning. When I felt secure, I said, I shall never be disturbed. You, O Lord, with your favor made me as strong as the mountains. Then you hid your face, and I was filled with fear. I cried to you, O Lord. I pleaded with my God, saying, what profit is there in my blood if I go down to the pit? Will the dust praise you or declare your faithfulness? Hear, O Lord, and have mercy upon me. O Lord, be my helper. You have turned my wailing into dancing. You have put off my sackcloth and clothed me with joy. Therefore my heart sings to you without ceasing. O Lord my God, I will give thanks to you forever. Faith comes from what is heard, and what is heard comes through the word of Christ. Now I just want to take a moment to orient us a little bit in the story for today. Because if you haven't noticed, we're racing through the Bible, and sometimes there can be a lot that we're missed, and we land in a place we're not sure quite how we got there. So I just want to give us a little mental picture of where we are with Naaman the Syrian and Elisha. A couple weeks ago, we talked about King David, and in about 1000 BC, King David was the second king of the United Kingdoms. And in 970, his son, King Solomon, became king, and one of the big things that he did was he built the very first temple of God. In 924, however, his son took over, and in a very foolish move, ignored the cries of the people who felt that the taxes were too high and they were oppressed with hard work, and he said he was going to make it worse for them. And so the north rebelled from the south, and they split into Israel on top and Judah on the bottom, and were remaining two different kingdoms ever after that. Well, 200 years later, in 722, the Assyrian Empire came and conquered the northern part, Israel. And then a little bit later, the Babylonians came and swallowed the whole picture up altogether. So where we are today is somewhere in between that. 2 Kings starts into the 700s and continues on for a little bit. Now I have to say, if you actually sat down and read through 2 Kings, it reads a little bit like Game of Thrones. If any of you are familiar with that show, it's basically you've got someone on the throne and they die, and all these people who think they have a right to it. And so there's a lot of murdering and backstabbing and death. And if you actually tried to memorize all of the kings and their succession in the story of 2 Kings, you would seriously have your work cut out for you. And so we've got Israel and Judah, and from this picture you can see Aram, which is north. And that is where Naaman comes from. Now every once in a while in the Bible stops from the present action. And in this case, it stops from all the kings killing each other and prophets yelling at the kings for their bad behavior, and focuses on this non-Jewish person. And this happens in the Bible, where God will sort of remind us that God doesn't just care about the chosen people, the Israelites, but God cares about everybody, and will use a story like Ruth or somebody else, in this case Naaman, that God's love and grace extends beyond the boundaries of Israel and Judah. So Naaman, a non-Jew, gets leprosy. Once you were diagnosed with this skin disease, in some ways it felt like a death sentence. People didn't understand how you contracted diseases, and this was a particularly awful one. Leprosy cuts off the circulation from your blood so that after a while, you lose fingers and toes and even nose and ears, and you become this thing that people are rather frightened of. And because people didn't know how you got it, once you were diagnosed, they sent you away from your community, away from your family, away from your job, away from every piece of life you knew, to live off with other lepers. It was a pretty awful situation. So Naaman, being the commander of a foreign army, maybe you'd think in the story that God had given him leprosy to punish him. But that's not at all where this story goes. In fact, what we see is this is a story of healing, of multiple people, a community of people who conspire together with God, whether they know it or not, to bring this man to healing. The first person is an Israelite slave girl who was captured on a raid. Now, when she hears that her master Naaman has leprosy, she doesn't go, "Suits him right, how dare he? I hope he dies." Actually, she goes to his wife, her mistress, and says, "You know, there's this prophet Elisha from where I come from, and if Naaman went to him, he might find healing." She begins the whole process. And so Naaman's wife goes to Naaman, Naaman goes to his king, and the king of Aram is the second person here who says, "Yes, I care about you, Naaman. I want you to have healing." And so he sends Naaman with all his chariots to Israel. When Elisha hears that Naaman is there, he sends word, and so Naaman comes with all his chariots right to the front of Elisha's door, and Elisha sends out a messenger. And here's the third person in our story who comes out and gives Naaman the recipe for healing. Now, at this point, Naaman, who has so much to gain for recovering his health, so much to lose if he continues down the road with this horrible disease, he almost quits. He starts to walk away because of his pride. He expects that Elisha is going to come rushing out to him and be impressed with his chariots, be impressed with his celebrity, be impressed with this commander of the army, wave his hands and do this magical spell, and Naaman will be clean. And instead, Elisha just sends out this simple messenger and asks him to go into this dirty little river and wash. Naaman is so angry with the ordinary, almost dismissive instructions that he's ready to walk away. Now, this is an important part of the story because let's say the story is actually about us. Let's say that there are times in our lives where we are like Naaman and we're in need of healing. And let's say that we keep looking for a burning bush or lightning to strike or an angel at our bedside, and we get mad that God isn't showing up according to our parameters. And we can miss all the ways that God is actually showing up in ordinary, simple, everyday ways. In fact, the invitation to wholeness may be all around us all the time, and we don't, or we won't, or we can't see it because our pride gets in the way. So how sad for us, right? But God isn't done. The last helpers come into the story. Naaman's own servants urge him to follow through with this recipe. And so now we have 4 nameless people plus a couple others who have worked together for Naaman's healing. This big, powerful man needed a village of saints to bring him to wholeness. I think that's pretty cool. I also love the fact that the Jordan River had a reputation for being a dirty little insignificant river because, of course, as we know, it really wasn't the river, was it? It's God. That God works through ordinary people and ordinary things to give us healing. In this story, there are many saints. And saints are not just people who are really, really good. And saints are not perfect without sin. Saints are people who do the work of God, which is all of us. We are not perfect. We all have that sinner part inside of us, but we all have the saint in us too. And when we do the work of the saint, whether we know it or not, God is working through us. On All Saints Sunday, it is a beautiful opportunity for us to light candles and remember those people who've gone before us. But it's also a time for us to reflect and think about the saints who have actively worked throughout our whole lives, who maybe are working through our lives right now, giving us a word of encouragement, a message of grace, and hope in a difficult time. We receive grace and faith from those saints in our lives, whether they're really good friends or family or acquaintances or sometimes even strangers. This is how God works, through ordinary people. And the story reminds us that, like Naaman, we can almost miss that opportunity for healing. But it also reminds us that sometimes we are the slave girl who shows kindness to her captors. Or sometimes we are Elisha's messenger passing on a simple message. Or maybe we're the servants who just urge Naaman to try the ritual. None of these people in and of themselves completed the healing process, but they were all a part of it. And so too, when you and I are a part of God's conspiracy to bring the world to healing, we may not always know the part that we play. We may not always know what that kind word, being present to someone in difficult times, and a message of grace can help eventually bring a person to where God needs them to be. We are the means of God's ordinary grace, healing the world one person at a time. Because I do believe that God is conspiring actively to work through ordinary things, to bring us all to healing and wholeness, one person at a time. And you and I are a part of that plan for others as well. And I believe that that is how God has chosen to heal us. And it's a beautiful and human and dirty and mistake-ridden, flesh and blood, sweat and tears way to do things. But that is the way God has chosen to operate. We see this throughout the whole Bible. We see this in who Jesus is too. And we've even constructed our worship service so that through ordinary things we can feel the presence of God. And think about it. Water, bread and wine, candles, the shaking of hands and embrace and offering of peace. Every week we have simple, touchable, everyday, imperfect reminders that God is present and active in your life and mine, working to bring us all to healing and wholeness, now and in the next life. Thanks be to God. Amen.